that we shouldn't impose some bourgeois yardstick in measuring the communist movement. Secondly, that the concept of the party as an advanced detachment of the working class is advanced in that chapter. And we talked about what we mean when we say advanced, right? What's advanced? Our worldview is advanced, Marxism-Leninism. Our organizational principle, democratic centralism, advanced form of organization. We combine theory and practice, and so on and so forth. And the idea that the Communist Party is a party of a new type is contained in that chapter. And we made the point in the second study group that that concept was really never used by Lenin, party of a new type. It was a product of the Third International. Actually, Lenin only used it once, that we can determine in a letter to Alexandra Kollontai, only once. But somebody really liked it and decided that it should be how the party was conceived. And then in this chapter, a basic idea is that there are two forms of the party: cadre party, mass party. One in conditions of illegality, where you have no room to fight openly. Secondly, in bourgeois legality or semi-legality, mass party in those circumstances. Our second conversation focused on Lenin's "What is to be done," which is an important question, important back then, and maybe given the nature of the regime that we're fighting now, even more important. What do you do? How do you respond? We discussed the history that preceded the writing of What is to be done. We talked about the defeat of the revolutions in Europe in 1848. We spent some time talking about this very important article by Frederick Engels. Actually, it's not quite an article. It's his preface to Marx's Civil War in France. It's the last preface he wrote. I think he died 2 or 3 years later, in which he assesses the state of the working class movement after the Paris Commune. So we talked a little bit about that. We talked about what the Russian social democratic movement looked like at the end of the 19th and early 20th century. There was no party as such. Couldn't be a party because they were living under the Tsar, or dictatorship, feudal dictatorship. There were no bourgeois party, there were no parties, you know. Maybe the Tsar was having a party, but no, nobody else. And instead, the left, the socialist movement, was organized in study circles, you know. And the main question before them was how to defeat the Tsar, how to overthrow the Tsar, how to create lay the basis for a democratic revolution. And we spent some time talking about the key problems that existed at that time. One was the issue of spontaneity, right? Spontaneity, that there was really no organized, people were just responding to developments as they occurred. And that was one problem that Lenin spent a lot of time talking about. The other was the trend of economism, the ideological trend of economism. Does everybody understand what economism is? No? Who would like to give us a definition? We had some good definitions at the last. Go ahead.
If I'm not mistaken, isn't economism the idea that there's no kind of intersectionality, that everything can be seen through the purview of just the class struggle, and that there's no other play? For instance, in this country, an example would be to reject that white supremacy matters, or like these kinds of intersectionalities matter.
Okay, that's a good start. Good start. Anybody else? Go ahead.
The idea that development is like the only real way to advance or like elevate the working class as far as like development of the means of production.
Okay. Anybody else? By the way, Brooklyn is with us. Welcome. Brooklyn, can you hear us? Are you able to
Yes.
hear?
Hey y'all, how's it going? Good
We
morning.
can't hear you.
Oh,
Oh, now we can.
Now we can.
oh, sorry. Good morning, y'all.
Okay.
Good morning.
All right.
All right. Eric, go ahead.
So economism, as I understand it, just informally, would be the focus on economic struggles in isolation from the larger democratic struggle. And so you are focusing on what you could call bread and butter issues, and not putting them into the context of a democratic struggle.
Right. Right. Anybody else? And wasn't there a trade union aspect to it? That there was a trend in the socialist movement in Russia that said we should only focus on trade union struggles. Only and exclusively. And that was a big issue. I want to make the point here, and by the way, at the start of study group 2 weeks ago, I posed a question, and it had to do with what we were talking about yesterday's march as well. Why is it that Trump and MAGA were able to abrogate, break, and collective bargaining rights for 1.3 million workers, and the trade union movement barely does anything? I said in the report to the National Committee last week, they made a couple press conferences, they held some picket lines in front of federal buildings, but not much else, you know? Why is that? I read an article by Brother Fain published in Jacobin. Anybody read that article? I'd encourage everybody to read it. It's an interesting article, brilliant in some respects. And it talks about the class struggle. It talks about the decline in real wages. It talks about the success of the sit-down strike. It talks about the billionaire class against the working class. It even goes so far to say that, you know, this ruling class is not going to give up power voluntarily. We're going to have to take it from them. Don't say how, but But there isn't a word, not now one word in that article about ICE, the attack on immigrants, abortion rights, silent. The name of Donald Trump, you read it, isn't mentioned. You know? So it's this class against class. And so the question that arose in my mind after reading What Is to Be Done is that a function of economism? You know? I mean, tactically, we know that MAGA has some influence in the Auto Workers Union, not a majority, but some, enough that tactically they felt that maybe we shouldn't. But that too is a concession to something. So the point I'm trying to make is that one of the central challenges that Lenin is grappling with and what is to be done is the ideological challenge. That is the battle of ideas. And, you know, Lenin is a student of Marx and he agrees with Marx when Marx said that the ruling ideas of any given period are the ideas of the ruling class. And that we are all, to one degree or another, captive to bourgeois ideology, you know, including the trade union movement. And he makes the point in What Is to Be Done that trade union consciousness is bourgeois consciousness.
Mhm.
It's bourgeois consciousness, you know? And the role of the party is to inject socialist consciousness into that ideological milieu, to elevate class and socialist consciousness. And that is central to the role of the party. That's kind of what he's dealing with. We also, in that discussion, touched on what you might call Lenin's philosophy of organization. And we're going to spend some time talking about that today. That is to say, how he cognized, I'm not sure how you say that word, the structure of the party politically, how he understood it and developed that idea. Another way of saying that is how he understood the essential characteristics of the party of a new type. Because central to Lenin's whole reason for being is how to build a fighting party. That's all he was concerned about, you know? Maybe that and, you know, making good Russian tea, you know? They make good tea, by the way, black tea. We were talking about tea before the discussion started. And in this regard, we reviewed the actual language of the resolution from the Second Congress of the Russian Party in 1903, the two resolutions. One proffered by Lenin on behalf of the Bolsheviks, the other proffered by Comrade Martov on behalf of the Mensheviks. And you remember what the difference in those, the difference in language between those two resolutions. Does anybody remember? No? One said you had to belong to a party organization and a collective. That was the Bolshevik position. And the one offered by Martov said you have to agree to, as an individual, to relate to the party central leadership and accept its guidance. but you didn't have to belong to a collective. That was what and underlying that, those two organizational questions were very deep and profound ideological differences, which we will talk about. Any questions about any of that? Speak now or forever hold your peace. No, we're not getting married. Yeah, just friendly comrades talking with each other. Okay. So let's deal with how this text by our Soviet comrades approaches and in some respects enlarges on these issues. Is the camera recording this, Trevor?
Yes.
Good. So in the first place, we know that the argument begins with a number of propositions which address what makes the Communist parties unique. And the authors contend that the first and most important distinguishing characteristic is our, they say, irreconcilable difference, opposition to capitalism. We don't like capitalism at all, right? We what do we want? We want a working class led state, right? And we want workers to control the economy, right? Public ownership of the main means of production. But not only that, but also distribution. We don't want nobody, middle people controlling. We want it democratically operated, you know? And that is what distinguishes us from the Social Democrats. It's an interesting question because it continues to come up. We did the other day, well, a couple of weeks ago, an interview with The Daily Show, you know? And they asked the same question. What makes you different from Mamdani, the Democratic Socialist? Put us on the spot, you know? And the answer I gave is that DSA types, I didn't say Mamdani because I didn't want to attack the brother, you know? I said DSA types want to reform capitalism. And that while we are for reforms, we see reforms as a means to an end, not as an end to itself. And we want to abolish capitalism. And then I gave a few examples of what that would look like, you know? Like, for example, with respect to healthcare. Best case scenario, we want a national health service.
Thank you. I apologize.
We want national. Obamacare was, I mean, all right, it was, they say politics is the art of the possible. It was what was possible at that time. But the best thing that you could do now with Obamacare, get rid of it and have Medicare for all. That would be better, right, than Obamacare. And, you know, even better than Medicare for all would be a national health service. We want to take private profit out of the healthcare system and make it for the people. Healthcare is a human right, you know, and so on. And then I gave other examples, you know, for housing, we want public housing, freeze the rent, you know, rebuild the projects, make them decent, expand them. Housing should be a human right, not for profit. Policing. People say defund the police. Well, that's okay, but we want community control of the police. Why? because the police are an arm of the state. And if we can encroach upon the state and put working people in the community in charge of the police forces, that would be an important radical demand. Wouldn't be socialism, but it would be a step in the direction of working class ownership of because we would control hiring, firing, budget, so on and so forth, you know? So you can bring in social workers to deal with, you know, people who have mental health challenges, and that's okay, but we're not opposed to that, but and that distinguishes us from the anarchists who want to abolish the state immediately, which we're for. Down the road, you know, nobody wants to be oppressed, but we think that there's a path to get there. And it's a long road until you have a Star Trek-like dispensation in which you don't need a police force. Though the new Star Trek movie, it's true, the new Star Trek movement has a CIA kind of outfit, section something. I forget the.
It's CIA or NKVD?
Well, one of them. Well, it's intergalactic, so it has many different. You know, they're for affirmative action in the Federation. Okay, so the argument that's made in the text then takes what I found to be a little bit of a surprising, if not startling, turn and places the question of the uniqueness in terms of what gives the Communist Party its greatest strength. Does anybody know what quality provides our parties with their greatest strength according to the text? Go ahead. Who?
I don't care how purchase.
Who raised their hand first? Go ahead, Lily.
I think I'd say democratic centralism, the ability to, once we decide on an end step, to mobilize the means to get there.
Democratic centralism. Go ahead.
I was gonna say our ties to like working people and mass organizations.
Good. Ties to working people and mass organizations. Go ahead, Trevor.
I want to say that the text said that we're rooted in a basis in science in Marxist-Leninism as our foundation.
Rooted in science. Anybody else? Allow me to quote from the text. Quote, "The communist parties owe their strength mainly to the fact that they are not parties of isolated individuals or narrow groups of professional revolutionaries, but of the broad masses of the people, with whom they establish the closest possible contact and whose struggle they strive to lead." End of quote. Did I hear that right? Our strength is that we are not a narrow group of professional revolutionaries. What do y'all think about that? Is there a rejection here of the professional revolutionary concept? And if so, why? Lily?
I'd say because if you want to have a revolution, you want to have a revolution in all aspects of life. And if you're just doing revolution, you're not living, you're not working, you're not doing all of these things. So you have to mobilize the entirety of society.
Okay. So I'm gonna make a little joke here. I'm not a professional. My life is limited. I've been working in the movement since I was full time since I was 25. It's a joke, Conrad. I'm not mad at you. Go ahead.
Adrian?
I don't think that he is rejecting the idea of like professional revolutionaries because he said mainly, not solely.
Hmm,
So I think it's just kind of like they're both necessary.
it was conditional.
Yeah, I mean, if you have just a group of professional revolutionaries with no ties to the masses, what are they going to accomplish?
I would say that it's like a pure example of like idealism, the idea that um the way we struggle is not primarily through like material reality, but in like, relegated to the confines of our minds.
Okay. Anybody else? Eric?
So I might be very off here, but we're trying to reshape the entire society, not a small number of people seizing power in some way. And that means engagement with the entire society and bringing that entire society into the struggle, which is also includes ideological struggle. And if you want the entire society to be transformed, we all have to be involved in struggle, because that's how you learn what it is to be a worker and what it is to fight for your needs under capitalist exploitation and oppression.
Okay. Anybody else? All of these are wonderful answers. Good answers. And in Brooklyn, you want to speak up, because I can't see your hand. But somebody should tell me.
I'll let you know.
Okay, good. So I agree that they're talking about the necessity of the party to have a broad, deep connections with the working class, And remember, in this regard, in that preface to the Civil War in France, Frederick Engels makes the point that the time when small minorities can lead revolutions at the head of unconscious, largely masses of people is over. He said that situation does not exist anymore. That the working people themselves, the working class themselves, have to understand the stakes and be involved in that process. Engels makes that point very strongly, in addition to a whole number of other points. But in order to understand why they're talking about the party that way, we need to review a little bit of history. And you could start this history, because not everybody was convinced that that was the case, In fact, I doubt that in many parts of the world, people are still not convinced that that is the case. And so you could start this treatment of history in a number of different places. I'd like to begin this morning with a person by the name of Béla Kun. Béla Kun was a Hungarian communist who led the uprising that established the Hungarian Soviet Republic in 1919, after the October Revolution, a year later, 2 years later. It lasted 4 months before it was overthrown. Kuhn was the originator of a concept known as the theory of offensive. theory of offensive, which held that the role of the party was to initiate a spark, to call for, organize a general strike, military uprising that would inspire the working class to rise up against the ruling class. And Kuhn was very influential in the German party, where he was sent by the Comintern in 1921. And he convinced them to stage an insurrection. What were the German, what did they call themselves at that time? Spartacus, right? The Spartacus. They staged a revolution, insurrection, didn't quite. They called it the March Action. And that's because it was held during the month of March. And it ended in a complete and utter defeat, tragedy, right? Thousands of people died because the objective and subjective conditions didn't exist in Germany for the situation had changed. You know, when the Russian Revolution occurred, Lenin and all of his people, the revolutionary section of the internet, they thought that they were on the eve of world revolution. You know, they, after World War I, they were like, now is the time. And they thought that, well, okay, Russia's the weakest link. Lenin had this theory that the weakest link in the chain, Russia could break free from the imperialist system, but that it would soon be followed by revolutions in Germany, France, England, so on and so forth. In fact, Lenin didn't believe that the Russian Revolution could survive without that, you know? But it didn't happen. And so you could just hear Lenin saying, oh shit, what do we do now? Because they were invaded by 21 countries, civil war. Winston Churchill, what did he say? Now's the time to strangle the Bolshevik baby in its bed. You know? And it was in those circumstances that Kuhn prompted the German communists to attempt an insurrection. And it resulted in the death of Karl Liebknecht, Rosa Luxemburg, you know, our best fighters was, killed. Unfortunately. Well, the third Congress of the Comintern was held just a few months later. And Lenin was pissed, you know. And, you know, he had been polemicizing against these concepts. He wrote Left-Wing Communism and Infantile Disorder, and so on and so forth. And so as a result of the failure, the mistake that was made by the Kuhn and the Germans and others, there was a sharp break in the politics that was put forward in the international socialist movement. And at that Congress, 4 major propositions were put forward. The main slogan of that Congress was "To the masses." To the masses, which speaks for itself. Enough of all this leftist foolishness, trying to organize insurrection. You better root yourself among the people. Number one. Proposition number two was that y'all got to build mass communist parties. None of these small groups of, professional revolutionaries. Not that they disagreed with the concept that you need professionals in the mass parties, but that you needed big, influential parties. That was proposition number two. Proposition number three, that in order to be successful, you have to win over the majority of the working class. Majority of the working class. And how do you do that then? Does anybody know? How do you win over the majority of the working class?
I'd say it's a large part of labor organizing, not just to form a union, but then to have the union be more advanced in its ideology.
By fighting on those bread and butter issues. But not just trade union issues. You had to support the demands of the peasants. You had to support the demands of women for suffrage. You had to support the demands of the national minorities living in the Russian Empire against racism, anti-Semitism, anti-Muslim ideology, so on and so forth. So the fourth proposition was the elevation of the United Front tactic. And it's the first time that that term is used. Lenin championed that concept in Jump Street, actually. And you'll see in his famous article, pamphlet, The Two Tactics of Social Democracy and the Democratic Revolution, he puts forward that he doesn't give it a name. Doesn't give it a name until later. But that concept is put forward. Any questions about that?
Just to clarify,
Mm-hmm.
the United Front is different from a Popular Front, whereas United Front is just like labor issues or working class, and the Popular Front is also allying with, which came later after 1933, which is allying with a lot of bourgeois parties to combat fascism.
Absolutely true. The focus then was United Front from below. We got to work with the socialists. Okay, we don't agree with their leadership. We think that the leadership is confused, but we got to work with them, around common issues. And not just the social democrats. We don't care if you're a Christian worker, because in Europe you have trade unions that are organized along religious lines, Catholic, so on and so forth. We don't care if you're a Muslim worker. We don't care if you're Jewish. We just have to work together, what nationality or religion you are, you're a socialist or communist. We just got to work together. Now, bear with me for a minute because the story doesn't end there. After the Third Congress, three major things occurred. Number one, Lenin dies. Lenin dies. He had a number of strokes. And as a result of his death, there were big factional fights in the Russian party, right? Who were some of the people who were involved in those fights? Does anybody know? After Lenin died.
Trotsky,
Trotsky.
Zinoviev, Stalin.
Trotsky, Leon Trotsky, who started off as a Menshevik. You know, he was a centrist. And then Zinoviev and Kamenev, who were Lenin's closest workers, both of whom didn't agree with the October Revolution. Do you know that? They didn't agree with it. And you know what they did? They called a press conference and announced, just on the eve of the October Revolution, and announced that what they were going to do. You know, but Lenin, you know, didn't throw them in jail or anything. He said, okay, y'all made a mistake. Big mistake, but you know, who else? Bukharin was another character in that grouping. And
Wasn't Rykov also part of this?
okay, all right. And all of them had different, you know, points of view about what was the path forward. Trotsky moved forward. He had his own theory. What was the name of Trotsky's theory? Does anybody know?
Permanent revolution.
Permanent revolution, you know. And so after Lenin died, there were these big factional fights, and there was as a big swing to the left, you know. And at that point, I believe Zinoviev was the head of the Comintern. And they thought that they were, again, because of the economic crisis that was taking place internationally, on the verge of another big upsurge, you know. And that period when they swung to the left has been named the third period in the Communist International. So the politics, if you hear somebody talking about the politics of the third period, they're talking about this leftist swing in the international communist movement. Trevor?
There's an LX Burr in the waiting room. Do you have an idea who that might be?
Oh, that's me.
Larry, that's Larry.
Larry's
Larry.
already with us.
Is he in?
Yeah, Larry's already in.
All right, welcome, Larry.
Yeah, I'm trying to join with another device.
No problem.
Just trying to join our network.
Happy to have you. So where were we? So the third period, and one of the main ideological, political slogans of that period was that the socialists were social fascists. They were mad at them. And for good reason, because it was the Social Democrats in Germany who called the police and crushed the uprising. Liebknecht and Luxembourg, you know, dead. And you know what happened to the United Front period? Policy, rather, not period. Out the window. Out the door. And as a result, what happened? Fascism came to power in Germany. Then there was a civil war in Spain, you know. Franco came to power. And then I think Mussolini was already in power in Italy, but it was consolidated because the unity of the working class was broken. Does anybody know what the first period was? You talk about third period. What was the first period? What was the second period? Huh?
Of Communist
Of
International.
the Communist International, just so we're familiar with these terms when people talk about it. Huh? Well,
Yeah.
they were working together. Yeah, they were kind of contemporary figures. The first period was the period of the October Revolution. That's period number one, up through the end of the Civil War. Second period began with the Third Congress of the Comintern, and that big shift to those four, to the masses, united front, win a majority of the working class, you know, and so on. And then the third period, we're on the verge of revolution again. Social Democrats, a bunch of chumps. No, they're more than chumps. The social fascists can't work with them. Fascism comes to power. World War II happens. All hell breaks loose. And how many people die?
Millions.
20 million Soviets died.
60 million, I think.
60 million died in
I think in total, right?
yeah, it was terrible, terrible. And then you had the Cold War. So the point I'm trying to make is that all of this serves as background to why at the end of the 50s, beginning of the 60s, the Communist Party of the Soviet Union feels like it's really important, y'all, not to make these mistakes over and over again. Don't be trying to build no narrow party. Build a broad party. Base it in the working class. Build united fronts. This is the key to success. That's why, they're asserting us. Because, one of the problems is that each generation has to learn these lessons anew, and that what happens in our movement is that time after time, when there are big setbacks and you have big parties are outlawed or parties split, new people come in, you got to learn the lessons all over again. A modern example of that is what happened. Well, I don't want to go there because this is being recorded. I don't want to call anybody out. Annie, go ahead.
Well,
Take it to the mic.
but but that gets to the idea of like, right, it's like you can like walk and chew gum at the same. As in like I love the term social fascist, because it describes something that I think is useful to understand about certain elements of the social democratic movement and, the harm that they've caused. But, the opportunism within certain sections of the leadership of a specific political stream, is something one can analyze and understand while still building broad fronts. Which, yeah, anyway, that's neither here nor there, I suppose.
Okay. Anybody else? Lily?
I don't quite recall who it was about, but Lenin pretty public that it was about a British Social Democrat Labour Party member, who he basically said publicly, like, yeah, we should communists should support this guy, but then he like wrote in his letters, this guy is as stupid as Kerensky.
Okay.
But basically even Lenin supported Social Democrats and allied with them when it was expedient to do so.
Go ahead.
I really don't want to like drift off, but too much. But in terms of like the question of also like political participation, and you kind of talked about earlier, you mentioned anarchism, and there is something kind of interesting within the textbook about anarchism. I'll just read out the paragraph. Anarchists entirely reject the necessity for any political organization. The anarcho-syndicalists preach that the working class should not engage in politics and that trade unions alone are enough. By denying politics, the anarchists in actual fact subordinate the working class to bourgeois politics. And I thought that to be, I don't know if I found that to be such a sound argument. And I think something that I didn't quite get is that it seems that we know that in our system, the political establishment will always serve bourgeois interests, and that certain people in power obviously are better than social democrats are obviously better than, for instance, the MAGA right today. But isn't it in any capitalist political system, aren't bourgeois interests just constantly served or fulfilled? So in what way does rejecting the participation in the political establishment uniquely subordinate the interests of the working class, or subordinate the working class to the interests of the bourgeoisie?
Okay. Anybody want to address that? Aaron?
I think that's an incredibly good question.
Speak into the mic.
Very, very good question. And I think it comes down to where you're rooted, and how you see your relationship to the bourgeois political environment or feudal political environment historically. So when you're talking about sublimating the needs of workers to the bourgeoisie, at least electorally, you could talk about reforms, but those reforms if the reforms are coming from fighting for the working class with the involvement and leadership of the working class, it's a very different thing than when you're making deals with the bourgeoisie, because you're still fighting rooted within the class itself for the needs of the class, given the tactical balance of forces of the moment. That would be my understanding of the difference.
Okay. Anybody else? Satisfied? So we were talking, maybe we'll come back to the social fascist issue at a later point. I want to respond to that. But I also want to cover a certain amount of material. Any other questions about why we're stressing the importance of building mass parties and the history that, some of which is very tragic, led up to our movement drawing these conclusions? Not everybody understands, in the period before our convention, if I got one letter or comment responding to some of the main propositions in the pre-convention period, it was on, I remember we got one from LA. What in the hell are you talking about, Joe, about this broad mass party concept? Where did that come from, And I was like, did you ever, I said, go to the Marxist Internet Archive and look up the resolutions and documents from the Third Congress of the Comintern through the Fourth Congress, because they talk about it repeatedly. That's where I got it from. I didn't suck this out of my thumb. I didn't make it up. It's there for you to see, and learn. Okay. Our text, let's move on, posits that there are 3 stages to building the party. Remember that from the reading? Does anybody remember what they are? Step number 1. Parties, the party, depending on the circumstances, either it's first starting out or it suffered a big split or whatever, it's been suppressed. Its work largely consists of propaganda work. Its work largely consists in educating its membership, building ideological unity, and laying the organizational foundations for the party, acquainting everybody with what democratic centralism is and what it's not. That's step number one, according to the text. Step number two, let's call it the take initiative stage. Everybody's on the same page ideologically. Everybody's down with democratic centralism. You go to the masses. You lead strikes and mass actions. It is the period when there is the merging of the spontaneous mass movement with the idea of socialism and the emergence of a class-conscious movement. That's step number two. Step number three, party becomes a force leading not only the majority of the working class, but other sections of society as well. Peasants, small business people, intellectuals, so on and so forth. Those are the three stages according to our text. Everybody agree with that? Make sense to you? I have a question. What stage are we at in the United States, would you say? Trevor?
Brooklyn has their hand raised.
Brooklyn, go ahead.
I was thinking about it as you were kind of going through the steps, and it kind of sounds like we're definitely not at step 3, but I think maybe towards the end of step 1, approaching the beginning of step 2. We're right, like you said, right now we're in that process of educating people, like in the study group, getting people on the same page about what the party is for, about what we're doing, but also at the same time, we're building a presence within the mass movement currently. I wouldn't say we're at the step where we're leading strikes or anything like that, but yeah, somewhere in between step 1 and step 2, maybe.
Okay, good answer. Anybody, Trevor, you wanted to speak on it?
No, I was just.
No, anybody else? Lily?
I guess originally I thought that we're probably more in the middle of step 1 just because it seems like we don't have as big of a membership to really get deeply involved in strike actions and mass actions, but I'm not quite sure about that opinion.
Okay, that's a serious,
Larry,
thoughtful, comment. Trevor?
Larry had his hand
Oh,
raised.
Larry, go ahead.
Some of those who were in the opinion that we're towards the end of step 1, heading into step 2. And it seems to me that with these steps, you can, as an organization or as a party, you can move up steps, but you can also move back steps as well. Because I think that there were points in time in the party history where we definitely were in step 2, and we didn't have to re-educate our membership and get everyone back on the same page again. So is it a constant process where you're, even after you pass step 1, is there still a constant process happening within the organization to maintain that step 1 status? And can you fall back as an organization and have to start over again?
Right, so this is a process, and you can go back and forth, depending again on where things are. The Italian Communist Party, for example, was well into step 3. They had like 2 million members. They were doing it, and then something called Euro-communism happened. And they were on the verge of power. And the leader of the party at that time was a comrade by the name of Enrico Berlinguer. And he put forward a concept called the historic compromise. We need to
Sounds great.
regulate, we need to just moderate politics a little bit in order to, that a section of the Christian Democrats won't be so mad at us and will come to power, and then we'll be able to do the do, you know? And then what happened? Soviet Union collapsed. There was a crisis in the international movement, and they changed their name to, does anybody know what?
I think currently they're the red. I think currently they're the Red-Green Coalition.
Well, but what is the name of, what did the party change its name to? No, it's not the Joe Biden party. But close. They call themselves the Democratic Party now. Yeah, it's true. In the National Committee, go on.
Oliver and I were tabling at City College the other day, and I was on campus, going to different, groups of like college students, and I walked over to this guy who was sitting on some stairs. I was like, "Hey, would you like to get involved, like politically?" And he was like, "No, no, thank you." But the other people sitting with him were definitely well into their 30s or 40s. Were interested, and they told me that they were. Or I told them, my affiliation. They were like, "Oh, well, that's really good. We're from Italy, and we're really sad about what happened to the Italian Communist Party." I was like, "Oh, I didn't know what happened." And they're like, "It's bad." And so they talked a little bit about it, and they were genuinely like crestfallen. They were so sad.
Hmm. Now let's not leave it there. The Italian Party has been refounded.
Yes.
And there's a group called the Italian Communist Party now. And then there was another group called the, what was it? Communist Refoundation. Communist Refoundation. So they're trying to regroup and rebuild. Okay?
I was also gonna say,
Not on?
Oh, another thing I was gonna say, that's kind of it's very different what happened, but I think Jakarta was once home to like, wasn't it the largest communist party outside of like a country that
In Indonesia.
in under yeah.
Mhm.
And with that, I know today I don't believe that the party is at all anywhere near what it once was, but I think in that case, wasn't it state repression and like the mass killings throughout
Yeah.
Indonesia that
It was
moves.
the party was, it was a genocide, I guess you'd call it, against the party. It was wiped out.
Yeah.
I don't know, 1-2 million people were slaughtered in Indonesia. Terrible. So in the National Committee, Rosanna and I have been arguing that we're at a rebuilding stage in the party. We've been in that stage now for several years. We were focused on membership growth. Who said that? Education, yes. And taking initiative. So I would agree. We're somewhere between stage 1.5 and stage 2, I would argue. We got the study groups, Little Red Schoolhouse. We've had like 6 now. We got this study group. There's a study group in Chicago. There's comrades in DC have a study group. Getting ready. They just finished Capitol. Now they're going to do it on the party, I think Dante told me. We have a study group, the Black Liberation Commission has a study group on Du Bois's Black Reconstruction. So we're immersing ourselves but we're also taking initiative. We're running for office. We have 7 or 8 candidates now. That's wonderful. We went from 0 to 7, and quickly. I'm trying to run in New York, if the comrades will have me. And we're trying to push the trade union movement to call a national march on Washington. Comrades are active in the housing movement. New York YCL is active in trans rights movement. We're fighting around 24 hours in New York, 24-hour workday for home care workers. It's not our thing, but we're supporting, so on and so forth, you know. So we're trying to move in the direction of taking more initiative ourselves and build coalitions, and also participating in coalitions with others. Okay. So now the main issue then, once we have these different stages, is how does the party, and now I want to talk a little bit about democratic centralism, with your permission. How does the party organize itself in such a way that it becomes a leading force? What are the means by which we're able to will together a fighting force from our membership? And our text argues that one aspect, in fact, it's probably the main aspect, is whether or not we're able to properly apply democratic centralism. Now, before going further, there is an important Marxist principle that we need to introduce and understand. Namely, that for us, organization always follows politics. Organization always follows, and there are no exceptions to this. This has to do with structure, format, decision-making, the whole 9 yards. It's really important to get this because people who are new to the movement often do the opposite. Somebody talked about idealism. You take a structure and you try to impose it on what you think an organization should look like. They'll attempt to put together a structure and decision-making process without considering what the organization's status is. Do you have the personnel, the membership to meet this structure that you're trying to put together, and what its goals are? They then proceed to spin their wheels, attempting to fit this structure onto the organization that doesn't have the capacity to fill it. My first experience with this was after the Million Man March that was led by Louis Farrakhan. Number of Black women, Black radicals came together. They were very upset with the male supremacy inherent in that march, with the lack of the march putting before any demands. Farrakhan said it was going to be a march through Washington, not on Washington. Main thing that we were going to do was, what's the word I'm looking for? Repent. That was the main platform. And they said, no, we have to struggle. We have to. So 3,000 Black radicals met in Chicago in the first, and it was a wonderful meeting for Black communists, Black socialists, Black left nationalists, LGBTQ people. A wonderful meeting and very important development. And then we decided that we were going to formalize a structure. And we went and we no money, no budget, no place to meet, before the internet, elaborated this very complex organizational structure. We had committees on everything, subcommittees where we didn't have committees. And then we tried to, without yet even consolidating the organization, tried to build that structure. And I used to joke that it was, we adopted a structure that was in search of an organization. That was my first experience with it. My second experience with it was here in New York, when we tried to, 5, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, when we tried to refound the YCL. I'm not sure Ani will agree with me about this, but
I probably
they got together and they decided to refound the YCL, and they created a whole bunch of committees on the working class, on peace, on Cuba, on LGBTQ rights, Black rights, women's rights, you name it, they had and then they spent all their time trying to get these committees to function.
Yeah.
Isn't it true? And the committees couldn't function because they didn't have the personnel to do it. My third experience with this kind of situation happened in the convention of the party here in New York prior to our last convention. When at the end of the convention, in the exuberance and excitement, what committees should we have? Everybody raised their hand and proposed this committee and that committee and the other committee. And I don't know how many committees were there, 10, 12, 14, there were a lot. And, you know, it was too many, given the relative strength of the New York district at that particular moment in time. All due respect to the New York party, I'm just saying that there was that kind of thing happened. Ani.
Well, we don't have to get into it. I suppose we can. Yeah, well, but I guess I would say from those of us who had the experience of what happened with the YCL, that it's precisely why that convention was not interpreted as forming 11 committees. And we had very serious conversations at state committee meetings about how that's not how we were going to move forward with those votes, and that they would be political goals that we outlined for ourselves as, you know, directions of work that we think are important, and that would be pursued based on, you know, based on capacity, you know, in various timelines, depending on how those things can, you know, take hold or not. And some of those committees have sort of formed and then kind of backed up, you know, based on the strength of the district. I mean, I would say
Yeah.
the New York leadership would agree with you, which is why we don't have 11 committees.
Right, exactly, because the leadership is more mature. I mean, no, it's true. That's why we call them leaders, because these initiatives came from below, from the membership, from the clubs, who many of them were new to the party in New York. Eric, speaking to the
So I just want to say that this is something that happens very, very commonly in my experience as new clubs come into formation, and they get 2 or 3 people, and they have 20-page organizational structures with lots and lots of rules, and then they're going to have 14 or 15 different committees, and they have 3 people. And I understand the exuberance of it and the desire to create something. But I think that the weaknesses are also obvious. Thanks.
So organization always follows politics and the stage of where you are. Our text puts it this way, quote, "The principles of organizational structure of a communist party follow from the role it is destined to play in the working class movement and the nature of its aims and tasks," end of quote. But the question then becomes, how do we determine its aims and tasks? Because the party's aims are larger than the aims of its individual members, no? In fact, our aims are more than the sum total of the collective aims of our entire membership, are they not? Why do I say that? Because the party has to represent the interest of the entire class and not any one section of it. I mean, at times, the issues facing one section may become more pronounced. Like, for example, when the Dobbs decision was taken, right? Women's rights became a predominant kind of issue, you know? Or when George Floyd and Breonna Taylor were killed, this fight against police violence became pronounced at that particular moment. But we don't single out, even within that context, the struggles of any particular group within the class without considering what will move the entire class forward, That's a very important issue. And the only way that you can generalize and represent those interests is, according to the text, through the exercise of a common will, which unites individual actions into one common struggle. And our text argues that this can only occur by means of a centralized leadership. This is how Lenin puts it. Absolute centralization and the strictest discipline of the proletariat constitute one of the fundamental conditions for victory. Lenin wasn't no joke. Absolute centralization and the strictest discipline of the proletariat constitute fundamental condition for victory. So now we've arrived at the reason for centralization. You have to forge a common will. The question then before us is, how do you do that? How do you forge a common will? Which brings us directly to the question of democracy. Because bringing together all of the disparate parts of the party's membership, you can't force that, right? You can't impose it. You can't order it. Party is not the military. It's a voluntary organization. It has to be a free choice of people who voluntarily agree because you're convinced that this is the best thing to do. Here's what our authors say, quote, "But the common will of the party cannot be created otherwise than democratically, jointly, collectively, by comparing different opinions and proposals and then adopting decisions that are binding for all." In other words, we place a proposal, we discuss it thoroughly, and then we vote. And the decision of the majority is obligatory for everybody, including those who lose the vote. Y'all with me? Any questions about that? Eric?
So I just think that some attention has to be paid to the part that says discuss it thoroughly, because I think that part of it is where the democratic part resides.
And we're gonna get there in just a minute. I want to hear what y'all got to say about it, because we have new problems today that the parties of the 20th century didn't have to deal with. They wouldn't have even imagined some of these issues. But give me a minute. So that's one side of democratic centralism as applied to the decision-making process. Another side of it is that the party structure is hierarchical. It is. But it's not a top-down hierarchy. At the top of the hierarchy is the party membership, organized in conventions, right? Conventions are the highest and most authoritative decision-making body of the party. It is tasked with two primary functions: determining policy and electing collectives to carry out its work. What's the leading collective? that it elects? Does anybody know? Eric?
The National Committee.
National Committee. National Committee, which in turn both elects and appoints collectives to execute its work. In the party, the decisions of higher bodies are obligatory to lower bodies. In other words, the National Committee must carry out the decisions of the convention, period. The National Board must carry out the policies of the National Committee. If you don't, we'll get a new National Board. All other collectives. Sorry. It's okay. Follow the decisions of the National Committee and the National Board. Any questions about that? And here's how the article sums it up. They say, considered as a whole, quote, democratic centralism in practice means that all leading party bodies from top to bottom are elected. There must be regular accounts of your work rendered to party bodies. We all report on our work. We just did that at the most recent meeting of the National Committee. There is strict party discipline and subordination of the minority to the majority, and decisions of the higher bodies are absolutely obligatory on lower bodies. Now, it's important to point out here that these decisions do not take place in a vacuum, but rather within the framework of the party's existing policies, and in particular, the party program. In this regard, we assume that everybody who joins is in agreement with this program, right? Concur with it and the Constitution. And that these two things are conditions of membership. Agree with the program, agree with the Constitution, or don't join. The point here is that when differences arise, the program is the guide around which those differences are handled. That don't mean that the program can't be changed or questioned. It does mean that the process for doing so is determined by the higher bodies within the framework of the party's rules that specify specific times and how those issues are discussed. Isn't that true? In other words, you can't come into the party with the idea that you're going to change this or that aspect of the program. I mean, you could, but we assume when you join, you agree with that program. And therefore, if you come in and you start immediately challenging the planks of the program, your intentions and maybe your honesty will immediately be called into question because members are vetted. You have a conversation. Where are you? Do you like to? Why did you join? So on and so forth. On the other hand, it is possible, and it happens, that over time, your opinion might change. And that's fine. You know, life don't stand still. Your ideas are not stagnant. New things happen. That's fine so long as the advocacy on this or that issue occurs within the prescribed lines that are put forward, which generally stipulate specific discussion periods before a convention. But you might say, what about freedom of criticism? Lenin insists on it. to which we say yes, within the time and frame that the National Committee decides. Otherwise, we have a problem. Why? Because if we're constantly wrangling over this or that issue, we are unable to form the common will that requires central execution. You see the problem? Question.
I definitely completely agree with the idea that if you're joining a party and with the idea of trying to change the program to some extent, I get that that's a problem. I understand that problem, but I think that there are people, I think that may want to join an organization like the Communist Party or the Young Communist League as a means to enter like the organizing world or get involved in actions, get involved in protests or movements or whatnot, whose values are maybe completely antithetical to the party program. And I don't think I would necessarily have like a problem with maybe social democratic and anarchist members or Trotskyist members who join not to change the program, but to participate in activities which they seem that fit into what they value. And I don't think I don't know if that would be a problem at all.
Okay, how do people feel about that? Eric, and then
Who's the other person?
Steve.
You go first.
okay.
I feel like there are already like avenues where we can work with people who don't like share like the exact ideological disposition or like the party line, things like the DSA or other like mass organizations or like united fronts. I don't think that because like when you have people who don't have the same like foundation that are able to still direct the party, then the party changes and it becomes something that it wasn't before. And we can lose that nucleus that allows us to do the organizing work we do in essence because we weren't not like strict enough, but we weren't mindful enough about like the environment we were cultivating inside the party.
Right?
Thank you, and I apologize. So,
We're free here with
well, no,
study group.
I like to be disciplined. One of the things I want to mention in this is to go back to what we're trying to build and where we are. So if you look at the steps, right, then we're trying to build ideological unity. And when you bring people into the party who could do all the stuff they want to do outside the party, there's no reason for them to have to be in the party to go and fight for healthcare or go and fight against the genocide or whatever, right? They don't have to be in the party to do that. So the party is a special place. And in the party, we have to fight tooth and nail to build ideological understanding and ideological unity as a foundation for the work that we have to do, which is to have everybody on the same page and then go out to the masses. And so when people come in and they are not committed to two things, I would say. One is they have to be committed to the program, absolutely, and to the Constitution. That's a bottom line for me. But the other thing they have to be committed to, in my view, is growth and challenging themselves. And by growth, I mean ideological growth. And if you're coming in and you're just looking to be active, not the place if you're not going to grow and fight for this party. It's not just a place to be, it's a place to fight for. Thanks.
Go on.
So I think one of the tenets of the first stage was building ideological unity, but it's also growing our membership base. And I don't know how if we're gonna have a mass membership base, how ideological unity even really works. Because in all mass parties, there's a lot of ideological conflicts between people within that party. But also I just imagine that I think saying that if you're not wholly committed to the party program and the Constitution, then you shouldn't, then this is not the place, then I think we would be limiting our ability to grow at all. Yeah.
Okay. You know, go ahead, Trevor.
I was gonna say, I mean, what?
Oliver also is.
It's, it's not that you may not have disagreements, but it's, committing to democratic centralism and that, you're not going to try and put your views over the collective that's been reached and try and like subvert any positions. So it's, I mean, plenty of people in the party have disagreements on this and that with the party, and like that's not going to like affect their ability as long as they're not going about in a factional way to subvert the party's positions.
Oliver?
I also feel like that's kind of like the point of the YCL, at least the way I understand it, is more so like you're not like in the YCL, you're not establishing or party policy, right? Like we're not voting on that stuff, but you are learning about the party. You're getting more involved in like things the party like agrees with. And also you're like, getting to know more members like through recreation, right? Like, isn't that like the three things like education, recreation, and like action, like the three tenets of YCL? Trevor can correct me on that. Is that right?
Sorry, what you say?
Like, isn't it like the three things we mainly focus on the YCL is like education, recreation, and like action? Those are the three? Yeah. So it's like, that's why I feel like I'm a member of the YCL, not necessarily the party yet. Because I want to make sure like I get to know what the party's about before I like really commit like that, And since our age range is like 15 to 30, you can't really expect someone, in my mind, who's like a teenager, like to know everything politically, So it's like, this is like the period to like get to know. And if you're not with the party, then you don't want to sign up for the party. But if you are, then you become a, CP member and you start moving in that way.
This is a good discussion. Lenin used to argue that it takes 10 years to form a communist, fully developed, decade. But that was back in the day. That was before the internet, before AI. Now, if you want to know something, you just type it into the AI and it spits out an answer, 30 seconds.
Unanswered. Unanswered.
I gave this whole lecture, it's not Joe, this is the AI, wrote this whole thing. I'm joking. I did do research using the AI. I bullshit you not. So 10 years until you fully appreciate the scope of the outlook and the practice that emerges from it. Okay, so that was back in the day, turn of the 19th century, beginning. So now maybe 5, Things are moving at lightning speed these days. So it takes a minute. And so when you join, we got people who come from a lot of different trends. We got people who come out of DSA. We got some people who come out of the Trotsky movement. Some who come out of the Maoist movement. You got some who come out of the nationalist, the Black liberation movements, Puerto Rican, Chicano, so Asian. That's fine, good. We're for that. We're not saying that you have to be a developed Marxist-Leninist in order to join the party, but you have to be willing to learn and have an open mind and so on. You have to agree with the main propositions of the program and the Constitution. And even if you have a difference with this or that point, you should not work actively against it. That's the point. And try to change it in an organized way. And that when you raise critiques, you do it within the prescriptions outlined in the party for how to do that. And that's generally in very specific periods prior to a national convention when you want to change the program. I'm not sure if I should read the following section or not.
Go for it.
Don't take this as a biblical kind of way. Quote, these are the authors. They say, since the Communist Party is called upon to carry out the great task of radically reorganizing society, it cannot consider mere agreement of its members with the party program sufficient. The communist is one who actively helps carry out the program of the party and necessarily works in one of its organizations. By organization, they mean like collective club, under its leadership and control. It was on this question that the split occurred in 1903. Comrades, questions always come up. Settler colonialism, one state, two state, Palestine, our electoral policy, Russia, Putin invades Ukraine. Next week it'll be something else. These issues immediately came up after our convention, when all of these things had been discussed and decided on, right? How and whether to carry on conversations on these issues is an ongoing challenge. And you have to have conversations because otherwise Marxism becomes a dead letter, a dogma, you know? And technology raises the stakes. You take, for example, the call for a national discussion platform where members can interact and debate policy. And there have been many calls for that. But our question is that a good idea? I mean, set aside the name calling and vitriol that frequently inhabits those spaces. The question is, given our decision-making process and structure, does that make sense? The question here is, how do you handle horizontal forms of communication within a structure that flows from the bottom up and top down, vertically? It's a huge problem in a situation in which there's a huge influx of new members into the party, in which folks are unfamiliar with how we work, and in that situation, they're called to set up discords and Telegram chats and signal groups and even public groups on Twitter or X now. And then there are national meetings and schools, and immediately chats are set up and established with everybody who attends. And then sometimes we've had situations where comrades start organizing outside of elected collectives to influence policy. Somebody writes an article that people don't agree with and calls are made to expel that member from the National Committee. That happened with John Bechtel. He wrote an article on Ukraine, people didn't like it immediately. People start organizing, we have to kick him out of the National Committee. Another person gave an educational in which a position was taken that somebody found offensive. And then they posted their objection to what this comrade said on Twitter. And immediately clubs around this country started circulating petitions to expel that person even before the club in which it happened had a chance to discuss it. What about the democratic rights of the club? You know? How do you deal with that? You know? And I mean, these are the immediate problems that we have to deal with, you know? And so what we've done is say, you want to have a chat group? Good, make it local, make it in your club. Or you want to have a Discord? Do it in your district. But because everybody is at a different level of familiarity with the party and what it does, in our situation, it doesn't make sense to set up that national structure where everybody can just say whatever the hell you want to say. What do you think? Yeah, you agree?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Lily.
I definitely agree that we really should not have, or we really should not have the kind of social media firestorm that can happen easily, like you just described multiple examples of. I do think possibly during like the pre-convention period, maybe a public or some kind of limited party-wide discussion platform would be quite good for discussing all of the what is it called, pre-convention resolutions or something.
Okay.
But it would have to be, we would have to think very carefully about its design and see, and do scientific socialism, see what works, see what leads to, or definitely try to avoid a firestorm. But if it does happen, analyze it very carefully and understand how to prevent it.
And you can't have firestorms. In Canada, there was a case of sexual misconduct by a party leader, right? And there was a firestorm on Twitter at the time. And, it takes place on Twitter, not just in Canada. And we were on the verge of having an international conference. And all of a sudden, we started getting these letters and petitions, and we cannot invite the Canadian Party to our convention based on this drama that was taking place primarily in Canada amongst members of the Canadian Party, but, spilled outside, So what do you do in that kind of a situation? Do you disinvite them? Or do you sit down and have a conversation with our comrades and say, hey, this is something that the Canadians have to deal with. We don't agree with sexual misconduct. In any situation, for anybody, we have a policy on it that's on our website. But at the same time, we have to respect the right and responsibility of the party in Canada to conduct their own affairs. There are those kinds of issues. So people had their hand up. Trevor?
Larry has his hand raised.
Larry, go ahead.
Larry, you might be muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
So on one hand, I definitely see the wisdom of not having some sort of national platform for us to have people come in and discuss things. On the other hand, being that this is how a lot of political discord happens in our society, it puts us at in a particular disadvantage in engaging perhaps others who might want to hear more about us. how we thread that needle, I don't know. I just want to say that. And then I agree too that maybe in a limited fashion we could have something like this during the discussion period, lead up to conventions. But even then, at that point, it would have to be overseen by people that in the party that know what they're doing in terms of how to moderate these sorts of platforms. And there has to be a way for us to be able to vet and verify that the users are in fact members of the party, or else we leave ourselves open for all kinds of bad actors who can come in and sow all sorts of discord before the convention even kicks off, which is something that I think that we, the 20th century party could not have even imagined was possible. So.
Thank you, Larry. Good points. Ani and then Eric.
Yeah, I mean, I think a problem that comes up in both, with chats and this kind of sort of theoretical platform for discussion, or on Twitter, Slack, Discord, whatever, is like people, is that question of like, are people participating in a collective? And are they speaking for a collective? Or are they not speaking for a collective? And also, are they misrepresenting that they're speaking for a collective in the platform? So, someone can say something on Twitter and make it seem like they're speaking on behalf of their club or our party, and there's no check on that in that platform. They just get to say it. And we have approaches to such a lack of collectivity internally. But I mean, I think that is something that comes up in chats and these digital structures often is where someone is asserting a personal opinion, or and then you have to like bring it back into the collective discussion, and you can't really do that on a digital platform so easy. So it's a challenge.
So just to be clear, we are in favor during the pre-convention period, which is generally about 6 months, of having a public discussion of our members and their different points of view. It's a 6-month-long discussion. We did it before the internet, in the pages of Political Affairs, our theoretical journal, and in the pages of the Daily World, the Daily Worker, People's Weekly, or whatever incarnation it was. And when necessary, we created special journals to have that conversation. In the period in the late 80s, we created a journal that I was on the editorial board of called Dialogue. Mm-hmm. Oh my goodness, that was a hot potato. Because it was right in the middle of the crisis in the Soviet Union and the International Socialist Movement. And, and in the middle of a factional fight in our party. So handling those issues was really quite challenging. So yes, but even in those, and yes, it has to be a regulated, conversation. You have to have an editorial board that, decides how to and when to handle it. And then another issue is, can people from outside the party participate in those conversations, or should it be members only? In the period, and the comrades who are responsible for making those decisions, because you'll have a special editorial pre-convention discussion, have to have clear guidelines. And in the period before our last convention, some of those guidelines weren't clear. And so I remember I wrote something saying that the pandemic is over, and some group of people outside of the party wrote a criticism of what I said, and they published it. And I was mad at it. You know what? How are you going to publish something, somebody criticizing me for saying the pandemic is over? Number one, it was over, but they're not even in the party. And they said, well, there's no instruction in the guideline that you wrote, Joe, saying that you can't do that. So don't get mad at us. Look at that man in the mirror. You know what I'm saying? So there are those kinds of, and they were right, unfortunately. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think also on the subject of like firestorms, I think if just disengagement really does help those kinds of situations. For example, recently, as I think many people know, Politico came out with an article about how young Republican group chats got leaked and they were just saying horrendous things on there. And the response of young Republicans were just don't mention it, don't talk about it. And it for them, what they said was yeah, it really did work. It just blew over because they actually didn't even engage, even though what they did was obviously extremely wrong. Yeah. And so I think really the lack of engagement in online like firestorms is the greatest way to just have them blow over.
I'm not sure that it is over yet, because I just read this yesterday that the Republican Party in New York has dissolved the New York Young Republicans. They dissolved them. Now they had to be reconstituted.
Same thing happened in Kansas.
Same thing happened in Kansas. See?
Yep. Some of our people were up there on there too.
But your point is well taken. Sometimes it's better not to jump into it and fan the flames. I hear what you're saying. All of this, and this is the last point before we end, raises the issue of factionalism. Factionalism. How do we define factionalism? Because there was a special section in that reading about a decision by the Russian party, Soviet party, shouldn't call them Russian at that time, Soviet party, because it was a party of the entire country at that point, on party unity and factions. Does anybody know what's the definition, our working definition of factionalism? Eric?
When you're trying to organize outside of the structures of the party and in violation of the norms of how, or the Constitution, as to how that discussion has to and that organization has to take place. So cross collective organization, maybe.
So factionalism are actions to change party policy outside of duly elected and constituted collectives. Full stop, period. Say you don't agree with a statement or decision of another club or district, and instead of taking it up in your immediate collective, your club, you begin agitating in other clubs to change it. That's factional. You take it up with your club leadership, you have a discussion, you get in contact with that club, other club, you have a conversation. Let's try to work it out. If that don't work, you take it to the district leadership, district committee, and then they'll work it out, so on and so forth. Or say, I'll give you a specific example. You are opposed to the decision of the National Committee, the last National Committee meeting, to allow me to run for office in New York. Eric, you don't agree with that. You live in Indiana. And then you get in contact with Larry in Kansas, and you say, yo, Larry, this is stupid. Why are they letting Joe run for office in New York? You know that the demands of the national take precedence. And then you and Larry start circulating a petition around the country. You go to California, you go to Texas, you go to Missouri, you go to Maine to change that decision. Right? You're preferencing New York. We don't. In New York, they think too much of themselves anyway. They think we're all in flyover country, you know? There's certain truth in that.
Oh, there's a lot of
New
truth in
Yorkers.
that. I'm in New York.
That is factional. That's factional. Now, everybody has the right to raise any question of concern, but it must be done within democratically elected collectives of which you are part. And period. End of story. Any questions about that? I'm running anyway. I don't care. Okay, so I'll read you the last quote from our text and then we'll be done about factionalism. The party has strict rules as regards those who do not obey the adopted decisions. There have been cases, they write, in the history of the parties where certain individuals who disagreed with the party line formed special groups and established their own discipline in them. Such groups opposing the majority are called factions. To tolerate factions is equivalent to relinquishing ideological unity and leadership in the struggle. This is why the formation of factions is incompatible with the requirements of party discipline. End of quote. And, you know, I know that there's so many situations in which if you, and let me put it this way, if you do not, to Eric's point earlier about the importance of democratic discussion, if you don't allow for that, it creates situations in which factions develop. You know, if you are in the democratic centralist formula too focused on centralism, top down, if you're bureaucratic in your policy, it gives rise to factional. If people don't feel that there's an avenue to say what they want to say, and it creates conditions in which factionalism can. So you have to have a balanced approach. You know, you have to create circumstances where those conversations can take place. Like on the two-state issue, one state situation in Paladin, New York district is discussing with the YCL how to, you know, work those things out, how to, what I, you know, there's a back and beautiful. That's exactly what we should do. Because otherwise people get upset, they either leave or they, you know, form groups and then and that's not a healthy dynamic, you know. And so, and doing this and knowing how to do it is something that you learn in the process of our work. It's kind of an art. And the article talks about the art and science of politics and so on and so forth, but we don't have time to go into it, but I would encourage you to. If you haven't read it, read it and think more about it. Anyway, we've been at it for 2 hours. I think. And I think that we've covered the main points in the article. There's another section that deals with strategy and tactics. Maybe we can talk about that next time. Though I should warn you, I have never been convinced that there is such a thing in our movement called strategy and tactics. I've never quite understood what that meant. And they say in the article that Lenin did never use the terms strategy and tactics. He always talked about tactics, you know. But our science didn't end with Lenin. It's still in the process of development. And there are other good Marxists who say, no, there is such a thing. And the problem that they argue in the article is that strategy and tactics make sense in a military situation, but not in the field of mass politics. And that you make big mistakes when you take military analogies and you apply them to situations of politics. Anyway, thank you for contributing today. Hope you got something out of it. I did. Good conversation. And we'll continue in 2 weeks. We're done. Thank you. See y'all online. Take care.